I'm going to talk a little more about phosphorus here in just a second, but I did want to start out with phosphorus saying that I think our requirements are about 0.23% in gestation, 0.26 during lactation. Those are the basal requirements for phosphorus for a cow. Keep those in the front of your mind as we go through the next few slides because they're going to be very important, very germane to the conversation. Salt is the other one, just from a growth standpoint. 0.2% salt in the ration, which whenever I put a mineral package together, I just wanted to point out, I always put enough salt in there to meet the requirements because I don't want you to have to free choice salt. I want mineral consumption to be as consistent as possible. You know, in a free choice situation, that's tough to achieve, but if there's not free choice salt, we can make it much more consistent. We'll talk about vitamins and trace minerals here in a minute. The other thing that we start to do quite a lot of is using an ionophore, whether it's for men's or Livestock, in cow rations. And there's data out there to say that, well, these are both coccidiostats, so it's going to reduce coccidiosis to some point. The cow is the primary reservoir for coccidiosis in a calving situation, so if you have a cocci problem in calves, it's most likely the cow dumping that back in the environment. So if you can start out with remens in, say, 30 days prior to calving, you can really stop that cow from shedding a lot of cocci. And doing so, reduce the amount of coccidiosis in calves. And we've found really good success doing that. Bovitec will work as well. The data I've seen would show that remens is slightly better coccidiostat than Bovitec. And then also, of course, there's the improvement in feed efficiency, a 4 to 5% improvement in feed efficiency on ionophore fed cows. So that means a big dollar in cost gain as well. Like I said, keep phosphorus in mind as we look at this. So this is a busy graph here, but this is basically down here. This is the phosphorus requirement of a cow just to maintain her body tissue, if she does nothing else at all, which is about 0.12% phosphorus throughout the year. If she's lactating, that jumps up, like I said, 0.23. I give it a little fudge factor, make it 0.26 for lactation to make sure that we have enough. This black graph here, this is the phosphorus content of grass throughout the course of 2 years. And if you look here, certain times of the year, especially in that spring flush, and then we get into that summer slump, that July time period, phosphorus content of grass does not meet our needs. And that's why we supplement some phosphorus, but we don't supplement a ton of it. If you look at a 6% phosphorus mineral fed from May to July and a 3% phos mineral fed from August to October, which is this green line, we always stay above that requirement for lactation. Okay, so we don't have to feed a lot of it because it's awfully expensive, but we can feed just enough and meet our needs. And we can do this through a commercial supplement, or we can derive our phosphorus from corn byproducts if we're feeding those as a protein source for cows. So keep that in mind as you're looking at your cow program. My ideas on phosphorus, it's been overfed in the past, but it was cheap in the past. Now it's, what, Kelly, $600 a ton, DiCal? Something like that. So it really behooves us to feed as little as we can. The requirements are not tremendously clear, so we're using some numbers here that are, do you have a question? Oh, sorry. The requirements aren't tremendously clear, but we're using some numbers that are about as accurate as we can get them. We also know that the requirement of growing cattle on the feedlot side is probably a lot lower than we used to think. We used to say 0.35%. That's probably closer to 0.25%, which is not a real concern because we're all feeding some sort of a distillers grade gluten feed, so we're meeting our needs many times over. But there is definitely incentive not to overfeed because it is stored, mobilized efficiently in the body. The bones store phosphorus, and so if we're a little deficient in short periods of time, it'll mobilize phosphorus out of the bone and we'll be fine. So that's my thoughts on phosphorus. Moving on a little, I got another 10 minutes or so, Kelly?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Moving then quickly to trace mineral and vitamin feeding. We'll talk about trace minerals first. In my mind, we're best off to feed trace minerals in a phase feeding scenario, and I'll describe that here. From about the mid-first to the mid-third trimester, I think we can get by and meet the cow's needs with no problem with inorganic trace minerals. So zinc oxide, zinc sulfate, without any chelates in it. And in doing so, we cut our yearly costs considerably for a long period of the year. Then we move into that mid-third trimester, say 30 to 45 days prior to calving, and up until about 45 days prior to breeding, I'll run a mineral that's roughly 10 to 15% chelated, and 85 to 90% inorganic trace minerals with higher levels of vitamin A and vitamin E because the cow has a high requirement and we're probably feeding some sort of an ethanol byproduct which contains sulfur, and sulfur can tie up trace minerals, inorganic trace minerals. Organics tend to survive that better, so we feed them some organics along with it. Now what I started doing, and this is one of the things I really wanted to highlight today, I started looking at a much more highly fortified breeder bin. Some of you have used it already, and I think you've been satisfied with the results. But 60 to 45 days prior to breeding, until the middle of the first trimester, we're replacing about 50% of the inorganic trace minerals with chelates, which amounts to the full recommended grade of Zinpro's available for. And I use that because they have the most research data out there, and I believe in it. And what I think we're finding, I'll talk about it in a minute. What I think we're finding, and what their data would show, is about a 10 to maybe a 15% improvement in first service conception, which is going to be the end of my talk here today. Because first service conception to me, like I said, getting that calf born early is actually more important than overall pregnancy rate. As long as we got pregnancy rate where we want it to be, getting it early is really what's important. And so anything we can do to move that up is going to pay us money. Because most of us have a good cow herd, pregnancy rate where we want it. So now we're looking at what can we find to get us where we want to be. And chelated trace minerals to me are probably the way to go. They'll improve reproduction, especially where antagonists are present. And those antagonists include iron, which I think a lot of us have a lot of iron in the water, sulfur, sulfur in the water or in the byproducts, molybdenum, which we don't oftentimes see, but if you test your grasses, I think you'll find a lot of molybdenum. Kelly and I did some of that this summer, and we found some high levels of moly in some of these soils and in some of the plants. So anything we can do to try to avoid those from tying up copper and zinc and manganese, very beneficial. For anybody raising bulls too, there is some data out there that suggests that we can improve scrotal circumference by 25% using higher levels of zinc, especially zinc methionine, which is chelated zinc. So if you're producing bulls, it's something I'm doing with a lot of my bull producers, myself included, to try to improve scrotal circumference in these breeding age bulls.
What age do you feed that to the bulls?
I'll start that about weaning time. And so I'm doing that, prior to sale. Because really, once those bulls are about 4 years old, they're pretty much set up where they're going to be. And then also, there's some data out there that suggests that we can improve semen parameters, so sperm conformation or morphology, sperm count, etc. So, but again, I think doing that with the bull's going to be running with the cow during the beginning of breeding anyway, and going to be getting that while it's breeding the cows. I just did this slide here because I think it's interesting. We talk about mineral interactions and antagonists, and this is all the interactions that occur between the minerals that we typically find in most soils and plants. It looks like a pretty tangled mess, and I'm not going to try to sort it out, but it just goes to show that anything we feed can have an impact on something else. And so it's very important to keep everything balanced when you're putting together your mineral program to make sure that you're providing what they need and not overdoing copper in relation to zinc, for example, because they'll tie each other. The other thing, Kelly asked me to include this, and I think it's important, is forage mineral digestibility. I oftentimes get the question, our forage has a lot of zinc, our forage has a lot of copper, etc. It does, but based on the research, it's very poorly available. The best is zinc. It's about 50% available in forage. I got a slide here in just a second to run through that. But if you look at manganese and copper, manganese to me is probably the most important reproductive trace mineral, and copper, they're 3 and 10% available in forage. So forage is not a good source, and we always supplement enough trace minerals to meet our entire needs, ignoring the forage anyways, because it's so widely variable and the availability is so poor. And to demonstrate this, I just laid out a couple quick scenarios. This is a cow's requirement for zinc, copper, manganese, and cobalt, in my opinion, mid-gestation. And this is the availability from the previous graph. And this is the concentration of zinc, copper, manganese, and cobalt in alfalfa grass hay. And this is the concentration in pasture. And so if you use her requirement and then the forage availability and the concentration in each forage, this is our deficiency. So compared to a 40 ppm requirement, we're 33 or 34 ppm deficient just relying on our forage for that mid-gestation female. So that's why we supplement. If you ever wonder why we're supplementing what we are, that's the reason. As I said, zinc and manganese probably more important than zinc, is very important for reproduction. It's highly concentrated in the ovary and intestines. So we know it's plant related in not only follicle formation, but also in conception rate. And like I said, there's info data out there to demonstrate a 10 to 20 day reduction in postpartum interval when it takes that cow to start recycling with that zinc methionine, which plays right into an improvement in first service conception. I talked about this here just a second ago, a 10 to 20% improvement in first service conception. And so earlier calving results in earlier season breed back, heavier weaning, and improved carcass quality from some data that we have. So is early calving important? And I think this is the hallmark of the presentation. Next couple slides is some data I did in grad school. This was some heifer data where we synchronized heifers or didn't synchronize them. And we saw about a 10% improvement in first service conception from synchronized heifers. And what that amounted to, if we use today's dollars, these are really low weaning weights. This is a ranch on the sand rolls, wean calves early, etc. But that's about a $18 a head advantage for an earlier born calf and a later born calf. Just simply getting that kind of calf earlier. And if we figure we use chelated trace minerals to do this versus synchronization, that chelated trace costs us about 2.5 cents a head a day. Do it for 80 days, about $2 per cow per year is what adding that high level of chelates for that 60 days prior to 45 days after we start breeding. That's about a 9 to 1 return on your investment. Nothing else I know out there that gives you a 9 to 1 return on your investment. And I really do believe, it took me a while to become a believer in this, but I do believe that that is true data. I really do. This is some other data. I summarized a bunch of stuff out of the research center. And this is wean calf value born in the first, second, or third 21 days. You can see $11.33, $10.63, and $1,000 a calf. So if a calf's born in the first versus the second, you give up, or you're gaining $70 a head, $70 per cow per year. If she's born in the first versus the third, that's $133 a year. A calf born in the third 21 days versus the first. That's just calf value. That doesn't take into account a cow falling out of the production season or having to cull a cow because she's bred late. This does take that into account. This is some data from Idaho State. Jason Hola put this together a couple of years ago. This is okay, so this is AI. This is a calf born in the first 21 days. This is natural service, a calf born in the second or third 21 days. This is lifetime wean, and this is the first time a heifer calf, if her calf is born in the first 21 versus the second or third. If it's born in the first 21 days, she weans off almost 1,000 pounds more calves in her, or 1,000 pounds more of calf in her lifetime than if she calves in the second or third 21 days of calving season as a first calf heifer. Again, huge numbers. And so we look at that as a lifetime revenue, using today's calf prices, say a 6-weight calf for $1.80, for example. That's what, about $1,700, $1,800 more per her lifetime that she's weaning off for you if we just get her to calf early the first time. So we can do anything to make her calf early as a first calf heifer. That's enormous, as that relates to her lifetime productivity. And we know that a greater percentage of heavier heifers in breeding when they're babies will breed more than the first service. But we can do the same thing with MGA or cedars. So keep that in mind when we talk about synchronization of heifers. We're really trying to get back at the heart of it to this number right here, lifetime revenue of that cow.
Is there a better way of doing that with MGA or cedars? I mean, you prefer one over the other?
Phil, I prefer MGA. I think it works better. But you got to be able to feed the heifer every day, and she has to get it every day. I think it has to be in at least a 2-pound mix, otherwise she doesn't get it every day. So there's definitely a challenge along with that. The 14-day cedar, the data that's out there would say it works equally as well as a 14-day MGA. But it costs you, 4 or 5 times as much. So you can run the cedar as MGA. But again, you go back to what that's gaining you. Really forgotten about it. So away from trace mineral early calving, I'll talk real briefly about vitamin nutrition. And there's just one thing I wanted to bring up, primarily vitamin A. We had some supposable vitamin A deficiency problems last year. I can't really answer why. I'm going to try to answer real quick. But we know that vitamin A is required for the proper eye development in calves. So if you see calves with a lot of white eyes at birth, potentially you may have vitamin A problem of some sort. Pretty pretty rare, but we know that we saw a couple cases of that, one around here and one up near home last year. And it's probably a result of higher nitrates in forages. We know that high nitrates quickly oxidize vitamins and reduce their availability. And then we can have storage damage as well. So if we're mixing that feed and letting it sit over the course of a day, we will destroy a lot of vitamin A. So you want to make sure the kid's out there and gets to the cow and she can consume it. We always design every mineral package to completely meet and exceed by about 20% our vitamin requirements. So the amount she's getting is not the problem. The problem is, you know, do we have a problem with storage or metabolism? The other question is, and I don't know the answer, there's a new NRC coming out in the next 2 years. Is the NRC requirement right? Are we a little low on the NRC requirement? The NRC is about, well, the data is from 1970-something. So it's probably time for a new one. Maybe we'll see a little difference when that comes out again. I'm going to skip that, I'm going to skip that. The last thing I'm going to talk about is cow production technology. I just thought as far as calving season, that was funny. It's funny because I'm 600 miles from home and I don't have to use it. But that's not technology we want to use. This is the technology we really want to use in first calf effort, in my opinion. This is the quickest way to get her bred early. Get her bred up early because we can use synchronization, we can use all our tools with AI in first calf efforts. It fits, though, with bull breeding as well. We just have to have more bull power out there. Regardless of what we do, as we talked about before, trace mineral nutrition is absolutely essential. Getting that cow where we want her to be in that season. Some of the other technologies, just to wrap things up, talking about cow efficiency, feeding technology. Somebody asked about feeding in a round bale feeder. We do it too. I mean, I understand the necessity, but it's about a 25 to 30% waste putting the hay in a round bale feeder. She'll waste that much of it versus running a TMR wagon out there. And so if we can do something with the TMR versus one of these situations, we can really cut down on feed wastage, going back again to lifetime cow profitability. The final thing I'm going to touch on, and Kelly asked me to touch on this too, and I think it's very important, is parasite control. And this is primarily internal parasites. We know, and even the people that sell will tell you that a lot of the porons, the Ivamax, etc., are not very effective anymore, especially against internal parasites. We've just used them too long, and the efficacy is poor. So what we're talking about here is a safeguard, for example, or volbazin, or whatever you use as far as treating cows. But the data out there suggests that cows where we use a feed-through parasitide, controlling internal stomach worms, etc., we can see about a 30-pound increase in calf wean weight because those cows are more productive, parasites taking less away from them. And that can also translate into increased pregnancy rate. Data out there from Merck would say about a 10% improvement in pregnancy rate, overall pregnancy rate. So again, you know, big dollars there. What we've been doing, we're recommending to people, and this comes from people who know what they're doing, not me, treating cows after introduction to spring pasture. And so we're using safeguards, say 3 to 6 weeks after we turn those cows out, because we're looking at the life cycle of that worm, and I've got a better graph here in just a second. But after we turn those cows out, that worm can develop into a mature worm in about 3 to 4 weeks. And if we look at their recommended graph here, so we get that cow out on spring grass about here or so, and grazing begins in about, now they have 6 weeks here, 3 to 6 weeks, we're running safeguard through the mineral. We pull all the mineral away for about a week, then we put a safeguard mineral out and let that cow clean that up for 3 to 4 days, whatever it takes her, and then we've got that cow worm. And then oftentimes we'll do something when she comes back in the fall again as well. But basically we're trying to get that first big flush of worms out of her so she's not reinfesting the pasture right away. She's dumping dead worms out rather than live. And so that again, you know, another strategy to improve lifetime cow profitability. So I think my time's about up. With some closing thoughts, I do really firmly believe for the next 5 to 10 years the cow-calf sector is going to be, if not wildly profitable, at least very profitable. Because we're looking at record high calf prices, and there's no reason at all why that shouldn't stay as it is. I just saw a report that heifer retention is higher this year than it's been for a long time, which means that a lot less heifers going to the feedlot, and it's going to take at least 5 years before we see a lot out of those heifers. You know, she'll have a couple of calves in there, but it's not going to make a big impact for 4 or 5 years. And so how profitable they are really depends on cow efficiency. And again, whatever we can do to make that cow more efficient is going to make us more money. Limited feeding cows creates less waste in addition to everything else we talked about. If she's got enough feed out there to clean it up in 3 or 4 hours, she's not going to throw much out of the bucket. She's going to eat it. And then finally, use technology, control parasites, use AI technology to fix for you. And with that, the next presentation. So I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'll sure entertain them, or you can find me after dinner or whatever.
We do have a few extra minutes for questions if anybody does have a few questions for Dan on the calf side or the cow side.
What's that safeguard coming? Is that in a block or?
You can get it in a block. You can, Eastland can mix it into a mineral, or you can actually buy it. It's a 25% salt mix with safeguard mix right into it directly from her. And put that out, so however you want to do it.
How many days do you say you got to feed them?
Well, if you're going to feed it through a wagon, you split it into 3 equal days. But if you're going to put it out there in a mineral, they'll clean it up anywhere from 3 to 7 days. It just depends on the cow. And actually, the longer it takes you to clean that up, the better it is, because it builds up in the worm's body over the course of days, and that actually kills them more effectively. This again is all information for people who know more than I do. That's what I have to say.
So why don't we add longer feed line?
Because their data would say 3 days is enough. I don't have a better answer than that, but we split it into 3 primarily because we want to make sure everybody gets some in case somebody's not eating one day.
And you're using the same dosage as what the label is saying on when you're mixing it in the mineral for
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, what's that?
I think it's a pound per 1,000
Pound per
pounds.
1,000 pounds. Pretty cheap.
This question is for Kelly. Kelly, the breeding mineral that we get, is it 50% chelate stuff in it?
The stock calving and breeding mineral is actually just the inorganic minerals. We do not contain the chelate in there.
You have some.
There is some, but it's not at that higher rate.
Right,
So how do we get to that higher rate? You could know farther than that, or?
Yep.
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 That's something that we did this year?
Yeah, yep, and that's the biggest thing, you know, and I think, Dan, you talked about cost. We did do a couple of super grader minerals, if you will, increase the available for it, increase some of that, actually put some organic selenium in there also to increase the availability of selenium. I think that cost went up 2 cents per cow per day. When we fed that, I think we went from about 9 cents to 2 to 2.5 cents a day. So yeah, there is an increase in cost per cow per day, but the return and the value in having that cow pregnant is going to make it.
And if you look at that over the year long, we're feeding that for 80 days. That still only amounts to $2 a cow.
You said 45 ahead and 60 after, right?
45 ahead and 30 after, 30, 45 after.
Okay.
It depends on what your supply capacity. But I want at least 45 days ahead because I wanted that cow to have 2 cycles, or the opportunity for 2 cycles if she has it, with a higher level of chelates. It takes roughly 45 to 60 days to build the liver back up, if you need to build the liver up, which is what we're trying to do, because they're all stored. But it's seriously something I consider everybody with cows to think about. With only about a $2 per year increase in cows, to me, it really is a no-brainer for what I think can get you back. Even if it gets you a 5% improvement in first service conception, it will easily pay for itself. Now, if you're already 75% first service, I'm not doing it for you. Short of. It's not going to take a super herd and make it extraordinary. It's going to take an average herd or a good herd and make it just that much better.
I got one. When you talk about dry cows, do you have any customers that like a dry lot year round, run them in concrete lots, heat round?
Yeah, a couple. Just a couple that have started. The other guys have more of it down. We have one guy that lives in Stillwater, one guy out in North Platte, and they do more of it than I do. But they do it. And I think, again, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to sell everybody on chelated trace minerals, but keeping hoof health, hoof integrity is the biggest challenge. You start to get to those long toes, or those cows get scuffed up, and again, you go back to zinc, copper. Those two, as far as hoof integrity, are probably the most important thing we can do for the feed to make any difference, and then high iodine as well. And I think also running some chloride recycling through those cows every 45 days is important in dry lot, just to maintain hoof health. But that's a challenge. That's a real challenge.
I have a quick question on, we did a lot of effort thinking this year, more people are looking at doing an AI program, and you talked about bull power, typical bull power, you're in a sinking program, you're trying to clean up those heifers, are you trying to, how much more?
That's the only source of breeding with no AI?
Well, after your AI, if you're trying to use the cleanup,
Okay.
is there a difference then? Are you gonna try to have more bulls than that 1 for 20 or 1 for 30 or?
No, actually, to me, if you have AI cows, AI heifers, one of the mature bulls, you can run 1 to 40. Because you should have the bulk of those cows bred. You hope so. Of course, that doesn't cover you up for a wreck, so if you're worried about a wreck, then you might do something a little different. But as long as we have adequate first service conception of AI, we should be able to run 1 to 40 without any problem. Now, if we're going to synchronize cattle and only bull breed them, that would need to be down around 1 to 15, because you're going to have a bunch of cattle eat them one day. Especially if you have young bulls. And actually, I would not recommend a lot of yearlings if you're going to synchronize cows. So they'll just lose their mind and run in circles.
But 1 to 15 will be enough.
1 to 15 of mature bulls will be enough. Yeah. It depends on the size of your pasture. If you have a 500-acre pasture, of course, it's a different story.
Any other questions?